Hi, and welcome to One Life Matters, the podcast that reminds you that your life is worth living with purpose, joy, and authenticity. I'm Trish, a counsellor and life coach, and I'll be sharing down to earth conversations, insights, and tools to help you navigate the ups and downs of life. Whether you're healing from the past, finding your confidence, or simply wanting to feel more at peace with yourself, this is your space. Because you only get one life and it truly matters. Just before we get into this episode, I just want to mention that this podcast is for general information, insight, and reflection only. It's not a substitute for personal therapy, counselling, or medical advice. Today, we're going to dive into something that most people find quite difficult to talk about, and that's death. You know, we live in a world where nothing's off limits, yet death remains the ultimate awkward topic. It's the conversation we collectively sweep under the rug. We all use little tricks to stay comfortable when it comes to referring to death. A quick casual joke or that old cliche, "You'll be a long time dead," just to keep the seriousness at bay. But none of that helps when it becomes real. The moment it hits close to home, a threat to your own mortality, or the imminent loss of a loved one, that distance disappears. But still, we'd rather avoid that honest talk about dying than face it. It's the one thing everyone experiences, and yet the one thing we all try to escape talking about. And it makes sense, really, doesn't it? Death represents the one thing we can't fix, can't negotiate with, can't truly understand. The unbearable pain of losing someone, the sadness that can feel never-ending, and that awful finality. The knowing that you can't just pick up the phone and hear their voice or see them ever again. It's almost too much for the human heart to bear. But what if, rather than turning away from it, we allowed death to quietly sit beside us? What if we used it as a gentle reminder, not fear, but of meaning? What if death could actually teach us how to live more deeply, love more fiercely, and let go of the things that don't really matter? Why do we avoid talking about death? Culturally, we've become experts at avoiding the topic. We say things like, "Oh, don't talk like that," or "let's not be morbid." Or my kids will say, "Mother, what's wrong with you? Always wanting to talk about dying." Or they accuse me of attention seeking. But the truth is, even thinking about death makes our brain feel unsafe. From a neurological point of view, there's a reason for this. When we think about death, especially our own or someone we love, the amygdala, and that's the part of the brain responsible for fear and emotional alarms, well, it lights up like a Christmas tree. It sends messages that say, "Oh no, danger, don't go there." And then the logical part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, steps in to try and soothe us by changing the subject, distracting us, or rationalising the fear away. It's a clever system designed to protect us from the pain of loss, but it also means we lose one of life's greatest teachers. Because when we avoid death, we often end up avoiding life too. We play it safe. We put things off for later, as if later is guaranteed. We end up living half present, holding back our truest thoughts in conversations, putting off the career change we dream of, delaying the difficult but necessary conversation with a loved one, or maybe telling someone how we truly feel about them. We delay essential acts of courage for a mythical later, acting, as I've mentioned, as if the future is guaranteed, which is perhaps the greatest illusion of all. Crikey, even tomorrow isn't promised to any of us. And it only seems when we experience death brushing close to us, whether through losing someone or even a health scare of our own, that something shifts. There's like an emergency override for our brains, so the fog clears and suddenly the small stuff feels irrelevant. The things that once irritated or concerned us, the traffic, the missed call, status anxiety, superficial conflicts, dishes left in the sink. I mean, the list goes on, right? But they fade into the background. What comes forward is what really matters: love, relationships, connection, and gratitude. It's in those moments that we realise none of this is permanent. The people we adore won't always be here, and neither will we. And that's not meant to sound dark or depressing. It's meant to wake us up a bit. Because the truth is, when we remember that life is fragile, we tend to live with more intention. We say the words we've been holding back. We forgive faster. We look up from our phones and actually see the faces of the people we love and life happening around us. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying we should suddenly forgive and forget every situation or person that's made our lives difficult. Some relationships, including family, are simply unhealthy, toxic even, and forgiving someone doesn't necessarily mean they deserve a place in your life. Only you can be the judge of that. But sometimes, the reality of death, the awareness that life really is fragile and unpredictable, can shift our perspective. It can soften us, help us release grudges that we've held on to for far too long, and remind us that bitterness only robs us of our peace. But equally, that same awareness can bring a different kind of clarity. That life just might be too short to keep tolerating what drains us. Too short to keep trying to fix relationships that bring more pain than joy and safety, or to keep giving energy to people who continually take more than they give. Forgiveness and distance can coexist. You can wish someone well and still decide that your peace matters more than keeping them close. But I won't dwell on forgiveness because that's a podcast for another time. It's almost like death hands us a lens of clarity, one that says, this moment, this life, it really does matter. There's actually a field of research called terror management theory, and it explores how humans cope with the awareness of their own mortality. The theory says that when we're reminded of death, we instinctively cling harder to the things that give us a sense of meaning, such as our values, our faith, our relationships, and our creative pursuits. So rather than running from death, when we make peace with it, even just a little bit, we can use that awareness as a powerful motivator to live fully aligned with what truly matters. It's not about becoming fearless. It's about becoming present, regardless of or alongside the fear. Because here's the irony: when we avoid the reality or try not to think about death, we often end up living as though we're immortal, saving our joy, our dreams, our affection for one day. But when we remember that this life is fleeting, we start saying yes to the things that light us up and make us happy. We book the trip, we mend the relationship, we take the photo, write the letter, dance in the kitchen. We hug a little harder and say I love you more often. Death awareness doesn't make life darker or negative. In fact, quite the opposite. It makes it a lot brighter and full of possibilities. I honestly believe that one of the quiet tragedies of life is that we often don't realise how much wisdom, history, and love our loved ones hold until they're gone. We assume we'll have enough time to ask. We'll sit down someday and talk about their childhood, their regrets, or their happiest moments. But sometimes that someday never comes. So maybe one of the most life-affirming things we can do is start those conversations now. Ask your parents, ask your grandparents, your friends, what's something you wish you'd known sooner, or what's the bravest thing you've ever done? Do you have any regrets? What made you fall in love? What's your most embarrassing moment? Record their stories, write them down. Remember where you were and their faces when they were telling you their story. Let them live on in your heart, because one day those stories will become treasures. They'll be the way you keep your loved ones close. Going back to my children, I often tell them to ask me, as many questions as they can about my life, things that they're curious about, and what they might like to know about me while they still can. But in their loving, fearful mind, they want to avoid anything connected to my passing. I'd like to share with you my own experience, which is why I feel so passionate about this. Years ago, when my parents lived in Spain and I was in the UK, I found out that my dad had cancer. I hadn't seen him in over 6 months, but when I visited, nothing could have prepared me for the shock of seeing his deteriorated state, ravaged by the effects of this cruel bastard illness. So one day during my time in Spain, I had the whole day just with my dad, and I remember finding this box full of old photos, some of which I'd never seen before, and they were all of my family. Now, one in particular caught my eye. It was a black and white photo of my parents when they were really young, and my dad was lifting my mum up in the air. It was really romantic. And despite what could be described as a very turbulent marriage, they did look really happy together then. I showed my dad, and I wanted to know where it was taken, how old were they, who took the photo. And honestly, for a couple of hours, my dad took me on the most incredible trip down memory lane. I was lucky enough to just go along for the ride. He told me more about his life in that time, in that couple of hours, than he had in all my 40+ years combined. He shared memories of his childhood, some great and some truly heartbreaking, in which I witnessed the very rare occasion of seeing my dad cry. And suddenly, so many things that used to confuse me about him just clicked. He answered every question I had to ask and gave me an amazing, untold look into his life, and honestly, I've never felt closer to him. When it was time to return to the UK, my parents dropped me at Gibraltar Airport and turned to walk back towards the car park. And as I stood there in the queue waiting to check in, I just remember a feeling hitting me like a physical blow, and I just felt a sudden absolute certainty that I was never going to see my dad again. And panic took over. I just tore through that airport, running blind, bursting into the car park, frantic with this pain in my chest. The fear that they might have already left was agonizing, and I honestly felt like I was starting to grieve my dad already. But then I saw them just before they got in their car. I screamed out to him, "Dad, wait!" And I literally sprinted the last few yards. I threw my arms around them both, holding them tight. And I thanked my dad for everything, for just being my dad. I told him I knew it hadn't always been easy for him, but I knew he loved me the best he could. You see, there were really difficult times in my childhood, but during my own therapy, I came to truly believe that both my parents had done the very, very best they could. And then I told him how much I really loved him. He died just a couple of weeks later. But I'll tell you this, I'm so profoundly thankful for that afternoon with him when I got to ask those important questions, the memory of which I'll carry with me forevermore. I'm thankful for that single frantic moment when I listened to that heart-wrenching certainty at the airport, because it gave me the ultimate gift, the chance to say goodbye and "I love you, Dad," while he could still hear me. You know, I sometimes think of death as a quiet inevitability, not something lurking in the shadows, but something sitting gently at the edge of the room, reminding me that time is sacred. And I guess when we make peace with that idea, when we stop pretending that life goes on forever, stop taking time for granted, we start living differently. We hug a little longer, we laugh louder, we stop trying to win every argument, because really, what are we fighting for? We begin to see how ridiculously precious the ordinary is. The familiar noises at home, the sound of laughter, the smell of coffee, the hand that reaches out for yours. Death teaches us humility. It strips away ego, resentment, and the illusion of control. And in doing so, it offers us freedom. the freedom to live, to love, and to let go. So maybe death isn't the opposite of life. Maybe it's what gives life its shape, its meaning, its urgency. And I so agree with Anna Mather, author of her wonderful book, The Uncomfortable Truth, in that we should all use death as the backdrop of life. If we let it, like I've said, it can be our teacher, a quiet reminder that the clock is ticking, not to frighten us, but to nudge us back into gratitude. Because one day, all of us will just be stories in someone else's memory. And the question is, what kind of story do we want to leave behind? So today, say the thing. Forgive the person if you can. Call your loved ones. Let go of the grudge. Laugh so hard your belly hurts. Gather the stories and tell the people you love that you love them. And then tell them again. Because there's no escaping that final chapter. Death will come for all of us. It is the one truth shared by every person who has ever breathed. But don't let that truth be a fear or something to avoid. Because between the beginning and that inevitable end, we have a gift. While we're still here, we get to have this beautiful, messy, extraordinary life. A life that we don't just get to live, but one that we get to create, and hopefully is a life well lived. Thank you for joining me on One Life Matters. If today's episode spoke to you, I'd love you to subscribe and maybe share it with someone who might need it too. And remember, you only get one life, so make it one that truly matters. Until next time, take care of yourself.